Good evening from Nigeria, um, and good evening where you're watching us from. You're welcome to this unique event for today, queer parenting. Today we have two guests speaking to us, and we shall be interacting with them. We shall be interacting with them on this sphere. May I call on my guests today to briefly introduce themselves? Jeffrey, maybe I'll start with you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. My name is Jeffrey Ogwaro. I'm talking to you right now from Uganda, East Africa. Currently, I work at Sexual Minorities Uganda as Senior Research and Policy Officer, and I'm glad to be here.
And good evening. My name is Monica Tavengwa. I am from Botswana, but I'm speaking to you from Harare, Zimbabwe, where I work for HIVOS as I'm a program manager for for an LGBT program in Africa called Strong in Diversity, Bold on Inclusion. I'm speaking to you from my living room in Harare.
Oh, okay.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Understanding the homophobia that persons of different sexual orientation are facing in Africa, I know it's a big challenge. So my first question would be, how have you coped with this phobia from the next person sitting to you who begins to feel, why is he saying he has a different orientation from me? Monica.
There's a lot to be said, and a lot of it is it's how you handle it, what information you have, what opportunities you have, and what level you occupy, or what class you occupy in society. So I think I personally I'm trained as a lawyer, and a human rights lawyer for that matter, and I've done a lot of human rights, so much so that I guess it helped me kind of be able to navigate through the different spaces, where people kind of look at you differently. They still kind of, I guess there's an intimidation factor. But when you're growing up, the thing is you know how you feel, and you feel different. And a lot of it is about understanding why you are different and what you are, and what information is available for you to be able to self-identify and be able to talk about it, whether you talk about it freely or not. And I think that's a lot of it. And I think then we make the choices, or we are forced to make choices, whether to be out in the open, as in you present yourself in a way that people can identify you, or you blend in, or you pass as just any human being until you let everybody know that you're gay or not gay. People don't know. In that way, that's a coping mechanism where you kind of don't say you are in the closet, nobody knows what you are, and you live life in private. And I think that's one coping mechanism that we all use to avoid the kind of judgmental homophobia that is normal in most societies. So I think that's about it. I mean, as an adult and as a professional, it's been easier for me. I think I've come to care less about what people think. And so I basically say, I don't need you to validate who I am. I am who I am, and I accept that. And if you don't, that's your business. But you can't come in my space and then tell me what to do with it.
Yeah, thank you, Monica, for that. So, Geoffrey, Monica talked about understanding who you are and why you are that person. So, how would you relate with that premise on understanding? So, at one point, when you understand who you are and how is it trying now to make family? So, I'm now moving away from the general public phobia to the immediate close relative phobia. How do you deal with that, or how did you deal with that?
For me, it took, I think, the earlier years of my life for me to go through that, to eventually reach a point where I understood who I was. Because I think right into my teenage years, my childhood and my teenage years, right into my early 20s and even late 20s, because I'm now 47, I struggled with understanding who I was. Coming from a Christian, family that emphasized Christian principles, I saw myself as not adhering to Christian principles, and asking myself for years why I felt this way, and beating myself about it, basically. Even seeking help from my chaplaincy at high school. And I remember my chaplaincy did not understand anything I was trying to tell him. But, and then a week later, realizing that it was a feeling that wouldn't go away. So it's right into my late 20s and into my early 30s is when I really came to understand that this is something that is built within me. It is who I am. And that is when I started, feeling a little bit more comfortable, and either directly or indirectly speaking to people about it. People who asked or people who inquired why I wasn't doing this and I wasn't doing that. And I think it's that coming out that I eventually did with my own family members that helped me to, to accept myself and not to be scared to be blackmailed, because a couple of occasions people told me they would tell my family, but that was not something that scared me anymore, because my family already knew that that is how I felt. So that is one way I coped, the fact that my family knew, although they were not exactly comfortable with it, but at least they knew. I wasn't keeping any secret from them. And that helped me navigate my way around society in general, even when there were threats to blackmail me with family. So that is actually one way in which I coped. And the discussion had to continue because, of course, there was resistance. There was resistance. There were, efforts to take me to counselors, efforts to pray for me. But I kept explaining and saying that won't work, and I will not be going for, any kind of therapy that they thought I should go for. And up to this day, the discussion still continues.
So, if I would want to place in perspective, your family didn't have to find out. You had to come out to your family.
Exactly.
So, was this the same in your situation, Monica?
Well, mine was it wasn't as clear cut in the way Jeff did it. I have basically lived my life openly, right? And so I've just left it, made sure that people understand what I am, and I'm uncompromising in that sense. And if they are ready to discuss what I am or who I am, I'm usually open to that. What I haven't wanted to do is, I felt like if I decide to formally come out, for instance, that's kind of pushing people to react. And I decided not to do that deliberately. Um, but I mean, I've had different discussions with all my siblings. Um, my mother, it depends on the topic of the day. But I think we have an understanding, that this is my life and I choose to live it in the way I do. And while I value their opinion and I value their support,
Hello.
they have to let me live it. And so it has been interesting in African families so extended. You know, the more extended the family, you know, they still have, you know, those questions that they ask, sometimes at inappropriate times. So you find families still, you know, trying to get behind the reason why, you know, at my age, I have never had a husband and I've never brought anyone home. I'm forever hanging around with women, you know, that kind of thing. But my immediate family, because they understand, they know, those questions don't happen. So it's, I think, just as much as Jeffrey, you know, you go through, there are many coming outs. They're exhausting in some ways, because you are forever coming out to a new person or coming out in a different way, you know, and it's something that I find quite political for me, and I think I made a deliberate choice to say nobody has to ever come out to anyone, whether you're heterosexual, you're straight, or you're gay, you're trans. I mean, it is your life. You choose to live, you know, and they, you know, they can navigate it. Why do I have to push that boundary? So that's for me, that has been the case, and I find even now today I still, you know, there are lots of coming out. It's never ever, the explanations never end. Whether you tell them today, they'll still ask another question tomorrow. So, you know,
Yeah,
you
I
learn
think
to cope.
yeah, I think I quite agree with you there because what I take from the response is it's exhausting, you know, having at every moment, you know, so it's really a choice on whether you come out or you don't come out. But what is important is that you understand you. I'm not sure if I'm right there, Jeffrey.
Yes. But also, maybe let me just say that my coming out wasn't deliberate. It was quite accidental, and it was out of a need to explain, like Monica says, how and why you're not doing certain things, why you're not having babies, and why, you know, it's taken you 2 years before you have your next baby and things like that. And for my case, it was a case of having lost my first child, and then a period had passed, and family was concerned and asking me, you know, pressurizing me, what's going on? Why aren't you having another baby? And the pressure was a little bit too much for me, and I had to explain that there were quite a number of factors involved, and one of them was that I was practically incapable of concentrating so much on having the baby that they wanted. And, you know, I remember the discussion evolved into why particularly that is. And I explained that I didn't have that much of a sexual desire for a woman. And then it actually shocked me that it didn't come as a shock to my mother. But 2 weeks later, she made a turnaround and said, no, I think you can be healed from these feelings. So that's how, for me, I came out. And then that was on my mother's side. And then on my father's side, it so happened that I was chatting with someone, or by then it was called, I think, Yahoo Messenger or something like that. I don't remember. And at the same time, I was chatting with an uncle, a paternal uncle who lives in the US, who to whom I sent the wrong message.
Oh,
if you get it, and it was of a sexual nature. So, so then
oh my God, Jeffrey.
he got inquisitive, and he's like, "What is going on? Was this message meant for me?" And I remember putting him off for quite a number of months until he physically came to Uganda and called me for a meeting and asked me and said, "Don't worry, be honest with me. Are you queer?" And I said, "Yes, I am queer." And then he said, "No need to worry. You're not the first person in the family who is queer," which was to me again news, because initially I thought I was the only one in the world. And then when I discovered other queer people, I didn't think that I would have any in my own family. And it turned out that a nephew and a niece who live with him in the States were also queer. So, and he said, "No, not to worry." And then he asked me whether he should tell my dad. And I said, "Hell no." But he went ahead and told him anyway. And my dad has been the best. He's just the total opposite. He didn't have a problem with it. He said all he wanted me was to be happy. And if I was happy the way I was, he had no problem with it.
Yeah, so interestingly, Monica, here Joe has driven us on a path I was going to get to, dealing with parental concerns. So in your own case, if you were to talk to families, if family members that have kids that are queer are listening to us, what would you be advising?
I think information is power. I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but when people know and understand, or at least they have the facts, understand might come with time and experience, but at least they have the facts to know that this is, sexuality it's a realm, there's this spectrum of sexuality, and we are all different in the way that we are created different, whether you believe in Christianity or the Big Bang Theory. We are all different and we come with different identities, and sexuality is just one of those identities that we embody. And so I think having that conversation from the get-go with your child, making sure that the child understands why there is no uncle or dad. In my case, why there are more aunties or moms than what they are used to, and just really giving them the support and loving them in the way that you're supposed to do. Of course, age appropriate language, age appropriate information. I remember, my kid he's 22 now, but when he was growing up, of course, going to school, you think you've taught your child all you can until they go to school, and now they're exposed to, other kids talking different language. And when they, kids say mom and dad this, and then they suddenly realize they don't have the same kind of family that other kids have. And I think kids very quickly learn, and they hear what their own parents say about, about me, for instance, especially because when he was growing up, I was living at home, and with the work that I did, I was in the news quite often. And so people would talk about, that lesbian woman, that, you know, and the kid would hear. And I think kids tend to pick up, you know, the nuances behind that. If when they say that lesbian woman, it's not said with love. It's not said to compliment. And so, you know, it's normal to want to be normal, to fit in. And I remember when he came home one time, we were watching something on TV, and he said something disparaging about a gay couple on TV. And I knew then there was trouble, because that had happened before and he had never had problems. And he was pretty angry. And that was a reaction of what he was learning from school. You know, the kind of hate that he was getting exposed to, which led him to think he needed to say something. He needed to behave in a certain way. It made him forget what I had taught him. And in that way, we just had to sit down, and I had explained to him that, you know, society is not always right. There are prejudices within society. And in the way you explain all the whether it's racism, tribalism, you know, the stigma that people get when they're HIV positive or when they have a disability, all of these are prejudices that have nothing to do with what is right, you know, and that these are prejudices that I didn't want him to carry around, that he should be proud of who he is, and he should be proud of what our family is, because at the end of the day, we love him. And I hadn't changed from being the perfect mother, becoming this horrible mother just because somebody identified me as lesbian. And I think that's something that you have to keep on doing. You need to keep on talking to your child and hoping that you grow a human being that is open, that can listen, that can see difference, not necessarily as a problem. And that doesn't necessarily want to fit in for the sake of fitting in. Because as a teenager or as a kid, it's difficult. Peer pressure is not easy. And so I think, you know, just having information where they can read for themselves, because sometimes just listening to you is not enough. You know, you need to be able to give information, because and they can read it off the internet or read it off a pamphlet, and if you see that it's getting out of hand, get support, be over and beyond, you know, the resources that are available. If there's need for a therapist, you do that. So it's about being vigilant, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Challenge now for me, Geoffrey, is what would be your approach towards queer parenting and procreation? Because obviously Monica identified some very nuanced approaches in this matrix. So do you think queer parents should procreate? Do you think, what is your approach generally in that wise, in terms of adoption, in terms of keeping a family and all of that?
Yes. So I will start by saying that I went through phases generally of my view on parenting or making a family in general. Let me start with the information that I am my mother's only son, only child. And I grew up pretty much alone in the house, of course, with visits from cousins occasionally, or me visiting cousins occasionally and spending holidays with them. I pretty much grew up a loner in the house. And my mother having been also a medical worker, I learned how to, for example, spend the night in the house alone when she was on night duty as early as 6 years old. I learned to cook for myself as early as 6 years old. So I at a certain point, you know how people usually say, oh, if you're an only child, all the resources are for you, you're having fun, you're really enjoying yourself because you don't have any competition. For me, it was not like that. I felt quite lonely a lot of times. And as I grew older, sorry about that. As I grew older, I desired to have a family. I thought I would have children, and those children would, fill the void that I felt, the loneliness that I felt. So I did go ahead and get married, actually, to a woman, and then, procreated, and then lost the baby. And it was after the loss of that baby that I think I entered the second phase. And in this phase, I actually blamed God. And I said, God, I had already come to terms, of course, with my sexuality, but I was navigating that within marriage. And I told God, why would he allow such a thing to happen to me? Why would he allow me lose my baby when he knows very well I'm queer? It's not very easy for me to make a baby. This was my first child. Why would he allow this to happen? And I think I kind of then drifted away from the desire to have a family, because I thought to myself, what's the use? If I have tried, even with my queer desires, I have still tried to make a heterosexual family. Why would I continue? So I basically walked out of the marriage. Then over the years, even at my time, having been out of the country for a total of about 5 years, I kept, getting these lamentations from my mom about the fact that I really needed to have my family back. And I thought about it, and I came back home and decided, because I had never really divorced, we just separated. And I decided that, this is after several discussions, of course, with my wife. We decided that she understood what I was going through. She understood who I was, because I obviously, that was another coming out that I had to do indirectly through the media, like Monica has said. And she said, all she wants is children. And I think I agreed. And I said, I still do want to have children. For my own sake, also, I with queerness, you also have to sometimes overcome, in my opinion, I know, that there's always the slogan of I'm queer and proud and all that. But at times, I think it is very individual. You have to put your family, your parents' needs into perspective. You have to put needs of the general family into perspective. For instance, one of the things I had to think about really seriously is the fact that my mother owns a plot of land with a house on it. And here I am, an only child. If my mother passes on and I pass on, I don't want this property to go to somebody else. I want to have children to whom this property would go to. So these are some of the things that influenced my decision to say that, okay, fine, we will have the children. She does understand that I'm queer, and she does not have any expectations beyond having children. We are still in good talking terms. We occasionally speak to one another. So the plan is to have the children and to have a family. And it is interesting in that my in-laws have really insulted me. And they've tried to dissuade her from having a family with me. But she's stuck to her grounds. She says she understands what this is. She understands what's going on, and she's ready to go with it. She's ready to, I guess, because at a certain point in time, I actually encouraged her, and I said, you know what? I do not want you to tie you down. I do not want to tie you down. If you want to go get married, we can divorce. You go get married. And she said, no, she's not interested in getting remarried. And all she wants is kids. So I had to kind of meet her halfway and say, I am interested in having these children, and I'm going to have these children. I know Monica is laughing. When I told my colleagues here in Kampala, everybody was awestruck and shocked. They were like, Jeffrey, you can't be serious. I said, I am, because I'm really thinking about my own mother, who is old now, and I'm thinking about you know, because I don't think we're at a stage where anybody is going to accept me bringing home a queer partner. That is not going to happen. It is going to create all sorts of things. It might even lead to the death of my mother in shock. So I'm just going to, you know, go the other route. So for me, I think that is how I have decided to negotiate the whole space. And still continue with my queer activism. And I think for so many people, because I remember we had a meeting with my in-laws about this thing of us getting back together and having and starting a family. And one of my in-laws told me, now that you want to get back with your wife, you should stop associating with those groups. And of course I didn't reply, but I continue with my, you know, social media activism. And that's what shocks them. They keep saying, this guy is always talking about his LGBT stuff, and here he is saying he wants to get back with you. And I have to keep reminding them that it's actually not me. I do want to get, it's both of us meeting each other halfway. And she's not listening to them, and they're surprised that she is not.
Yes. If I may cut in, you just mentioned something that is interesting for me, and I want Monica to respond to that. When you talk about not being easy bringing home a queer partner, and here we have Monica. You know, you say your son is about 22 years. Have you ever brought home a partner? Has he ever seen a partner? What is it like?
You know, it's interesting. Before I go into that, and how Jeffrey mentioned that as much as you're grown up and you're independent, your family is very important to a lot of the decisions that you make. Often we make those decisions not because they benefit us per se, but because we want to placate the family. You know, we go into the marriages, or we have kids and so on and so forth. And I think this might be a little bit easier if you're a woman. I think generally people don't get as heckled up if I bring a woman home. They can just say, oh, that's Monica's friend, and nobody, you know, gets too mad about it, even though they actually know that Monica's friend is actually Monica's small house. But so yeah. And you know, the thing about African families in the way we see them and the way they have developed is a lot of the time you find single women with children. Now, how those children were conceived, nobody really usually don't even ask or care. Once there's a child, however that child came into being, doesn't matter. These people will love this child and support the child. They may not support what they call your lifestyle choices. I hate that word, but people love to use it. But the fact that you have a kid is actually quite welcome. I've seen, I think when I was younger, the questions that I got was more around when are you having kids, more than when are you getting married.
Yeah.
You know? And so that told you, and it might be different in this side of the world, but this is what we got. And less and less, I've had people, every time you meet someone, they ask you if you have kids, not whether you're married. And so they are really not interested so much. And that I guess that's the easier part of being a woman. I think it would be easier for my queer brother, for instance, to bring a man and say, this is my friend. And then this friend will proceed to sleep in their room with them together. You see, that will be viewed differently. I can promise you that, even in my own family. Whereas in my family, they ignored it, even when they fully knew that this person is. Now,
Mm.
the thing with my son is, I mean, he grew up, this is the only thing he ever saw with me. And I think a child comes to love whoever you love, and whoever you treat with respect, they come to understand, and you know, and I think he's always telling me that he's grown up among women, and sometimes I do feel like maybe he doesn't have the male figure to look up to, because of course he's a boy and he needs a father in that sense. He's got lots of uncles, but he doesn't have that, you know.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting, stuff that you have to think about. How do you balance the needs of your child? Where do you find that father figure sometimes? And I think those are things that you can only deal with when you're in that situation. You cannot plan for them, because it depends on how, what you did to get that child, for instance. If the father is there, that's easier. You can get them involved if they want to be involved. But you might have used other means to be able to do that, and that makes it a little bit of a challenge. And so, I mean, the African family, in the way it is, you have the extended family. I have lots of brothers in that play the role, and they guide quite well. That I feel that, he had enough of that. I also grew up in a single parent family with my mother, and I think I kind of have the foundation that I don't feel like I missed too much. I still had the love of my family. I still had the love of grandmothers, grandparents, uncles and aunts, and they've done the best they can, even when it was a single parent family. And so it's appreciating those little nuances and making sure that you listen and you give the support that is needed.
Okay, so basically what matters here is I want to translate your use of the child loving whom he wants to love or whom she wants to love, to trying to teach humanity to be human. It doesn't matter what it is, what your orientation is and all of that, right? Am I correct about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. When you think about families, and I think in Africa, we know there are different kinds of families, right? We know there are grandmothers who brought up kids, and those are still families. We know there are siblings who've raised each other. Those are still families. We also know that there are families where there's a mother and a father. And they are families, and they are families where there are single parents either side. They are families. Now, the important thing is the connection inside of that family, because you can have a mother and a father and it doesn't work. There's violence in the family. There's just, the connection is not there, and the wrong things are happening. And that child does not get the nurturing that is necessary, right? So I don't think, for me, it's not about the composition of the family. It's more about what is there support and love for kids to grow up with proper information, the right kind of information about sexuality, about themselves, about all things that are important, whether it's racism, it's about economy, it's about tribalism. In Africa, tribalism is a real issue. All of these things are things that kids need to grow up understanding exactly how they will impact their lives. And sexuality is just one of them.
Yeah, so Jeffrey, one factor that I have heard people argue that queer parents shouldn't be allowed to adopt, for instance, is that they are going to influence the child and tailor the child into a particular orientation. How would you react to this, and would you subscribe to allowing peer parents, for instance, adopt?
Hey, that one is. I think it's a no-brainer for me, because for me, I think the most important thing is to get the assurance that whoever is adopting a child is a person in whose home the child will be happy. The child will grow up wholesomely, holistically, and so on. It doesn't matter whether it is a single parent. It doesn't matter whether it is a heterosexual couple. It doesn't matter whether it is a queer couple. And these families, I believe, out there that have adopted children, heterosexual families that have adopted children, and the children have not turned out, as good. And then there are those where the children have turned out great. And I think it's the onus is to explain and say it's not something that rubs off or is copied necessarily. I mean, Monica has a son who has grown up with her, but she has had to explain to this son these issues. The son, could have turned out either way, queer or not queer. I think
He's not.
He's not queer, see? So, and would you say that because Monica is queer, then the son turned out queer? No. Of course, Monica didn't adopt this child, but Monica brought up this child. So for me, I think it is a no-brainer, really. It's just one of those homophobic arguments that people make, the fear of the unknown, the whole argument about learning, because that's also a struggle I've had in my own family. I've been asked by my mother, where could you have learned this from? And I had to say it again and again that I didn't learn it from anywhere. And I had to even remind her, for instance, that when I was in the first year of primary school, I had a boyfriend called Abdul. Do you remember? I asked her. And she said, oh, yes, I remember Abdul, the neighbor's son. And I said, yes, well, I had a crush on Abdul. So where did I learn it from? And
the neighbor's son, Jeffrey.
And there's the argument of media and so on. She actually brought it up. She said, maybe you learned it from TV. And I said, no. Those years when I was growing up, romantic relationships in movies were heterosexual. There was nothing queer on TV, absolutely nothing queer. So I couldn't have learned it from there.
Yeah. No, that is interesting, and we are gradually coming to the end of this interesting session. I wish we could go on and on and on. But as a way of rounding off for this session, I would just be asking us to, in like 2 minutes each, if you could recap what it is for you and the advice you have for the viewers across this video. I'll start from Monica and then with Geoffrey, and we'll call it off. Thank you.
Thanks. The one thing I always say to people is we are all human beings and we are all different, and let's respect one another and respect that difference. Appreciate the difference, because it actually makes this world that much more interesting. That we have all these differences. And one thing is, there are things that you just can't control. And as long as you are trying to control other people and prevent them from being who they are, means you are creating a situation where there is a level of, I want to say, the well-being of another person is affected because of those views that you are imposing on others, whether you base those views on culture, religion, or whatever other aspect. You are imposing those on somebody else's life and making them, they are unable to express themselves and not be able to be whole. It is not a fashion statement, no. It's not something that you put on tomorrow, you put on a different shirt. the next day you put on a different shirt. No, it is who you are. You know, being attracted to another human being and expressing that attraction sexually is part of being a human being. And so I don't think it's right that people should impose that. And I think we should try and forget about the blaming the West or blaming Europeans or TV. We've always had very expressive sexualities in Africa. If you speak to our elders, they will tell you there was an uncle and aunt, someone in the family who was queer, right? And those people had never traveled anywhere. They were part of the community. They were part of families. They were that way because of they just were. And it is important to accept that and to realize that we are wasting a lot of resources. We are wasting a lot of lives, because the more unwell people are mentally, because they are in the closet, they are afraid to come out. They have mental health issues that force them into making high-risk decisions about their lives, especially when they are children. As a child, it's difficult enough, growing up with the hormones, but knowing that your parents don't accept who you are and what you are, I think that's the most difficult thing that you can have to deal with. And as a parent, I would say, just support your kids, make sure they can be the best, they can be, give them opportunities that we never had as kids. But at least as parents, let's allow them to grow as large as they can be.
Thank you, Monica. Jeffrey.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to speak from a perspective of procreating and also having a partner, right? It has become quite a topic here in Uganda, because in the LGBT community of activists here, a couple, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 people have made the decision to get married heterosexually. And I have seen them attacked on social media by fellow activists and fellow community members, who are you exactly? You do not, you're not who you claim you are. It's almost like it's a membership club where everybody must follow certain rules. What I have to say is, everybody comes from a different background. Everybody has totally different challenges. A lot of people have to negotiate their sexuality with their family expectations. It might be easy for some to go solo and say, this is who I am and this is how I'm going to live my life. It might be difficult for others to do that. It might be that others have compromises that they have to make within their families. And it does not remove the fact that they are queer. I always like to say queerness is a feeling. You may go ahead and get married heterosexually. You may go ahead and sleep with the opposite sex just to prove a point, but the feeling never goes away. You still have it, and as long as you are at a position where you are okay with your queer feelings, and it's not going to drive you to desperation of any sort. It's not going to drive you to mental illness or depression and stuff. Do what you can do. And I think certain decisions are more comfortably made the older one is. For me, I can make decisions quite more easily and negotiate around them more easily because I am much, much older. It might not be easy for a 20-something-year-old to make such a decision, for example, and because that may contribute to their regrets and then leading to depression and so on. So I think let's be kind within the queer community. Let's understand why people are making certain decisions as well. And I'm not saying this because I have decided to make the decision. I have seen others make the decision. And it wasn't easy for me to make this decision. And it's also not to say that because I've made particular decisions or somebody makes particular decisions to to negotiate their existence within family and larger society, that they have gone completely astray. It could be that there's a target they have. There's something they see at the end of it all, and they have probably discussed it with family, like I have. For me, the difference is that I'm not pretending to be what I'm not. Everybody knows. My wife knows, my mother knows, my father knows, everybody knows. And I've given them the ultimatum, basically. Take me as I am, or just fuck it.
Thank you, Monica and Jeffrey. It's been wonderful having you on set today. Thank you. I wish us all a happy celebrations. Stay tuned. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Azubike. Thank you, David. Thanks, Monica. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.